Before I pull up my screens and talk through anything that we're going to cover today, I'll just introduce myself for those of you who have not been able to meet before. If you are, here for the first time, welcome. If you're returning, also thank you so much and excited to have you come back. But my name is Christy Massalero, and I am one of the VITA tax volunteers. This will be my 5th year doing this, and always excited to return and work with Donna, doing the training, doing whatever else. I'll be the site coordinator again this year for the Downingtown location. I'll be there every Thursday as well as every other Monday this year, and then help out at Coatesville site on a couple of Saturdays and jump in whenever anything else is needed. So hope to see you all in person. I know we have a couple of really good in-person and mentoring days for those that are able to join. So excited to be able to meet with all of you in person at some point. We have 3 sessions today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. Again, I know it's a lot. We looked at the calendar. This seemed like the best way to accomplish both these trainings and be able to prepare you all to come for some in-person mentoring days and everything ready before the first tax day, the opening day of tax season. I know there's a couple of us on the call. I do like to keep these as interactive as possible. I know we do have a lot to cover, but please feel free to come off mute or put something in the chat. I'll try to monitor the chat. I am unfortunately only on one monitor today, so I'll try to flip back and forth as I can. I'll give you all time to do some of your own work for a few moments. If we really feel ambitious today, we could do breakouts. I don't know if we're going to do that today or if we'll save that for tomorrow. Today's session, we're going to spend most of our time in the 4012 workbook and the test questions. And then tomorrow and Wednesday, we'll spend most of our time in TaxSlayer. So I'll go through a couple of those things that what we'll need to cover for that. The goal with the basic training is to first get you comfortable with the 4012. That is your main resource during tax season, to understand all the different rules and tables and numbers and all of that stuff. The second goal of our session in the basic training is to make sure that you have all the information you need in order to pass the certification tests. So again, for those of you who are returning, this is very similar to last year or years prior. If it's your first year, don't worry. Want to make sure that we cover what we can so you can pass those certification tests, because then that is what gets you into the next round of support and mentoring and training, and obviously being able to be there during the tax season. No one has the expectation that you'll memorize the 4012. Even after how many years I've been doing this, I still don't have it all memorized. I know a little bit, or I know enough of how to use it as a resource, but things change every year. And so my goal is to make sure that you get comfortable with that as a resource, and then understand enough of the questions and the answers so that you can pass the certification test. I will answer what questions I can for you in all of these sessions. If it's something I can't answer, I will take note of it, and I will try to follow up in the next session, or at least via email as we can. All right, before I pull up any presentations and any other resources, does anyone have any questions?
Oh,
All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Last year I was with you guys, so this is my second year.
Awesome. Welcome.
I know it feels like just yesterday. Anyway, last year when we were brand new, we had mentors. Are we going to do that? I mean, I'm not new anymore, but are they going to have the mentors?
Yes, we are going to do mentors. We're going to do it a little bit different this year. Donna, I don't know if you want to talk through it or if you want to wait for other emails that are coming out. But we're gonna try to support a little bit differently with some mentoring days and have mentors a little bit different this year.
Yeah, we'll get into all that later, and you'll be told even during training how you do it. And Cheryl, you're virtual, correct? I think she's on mute. But anyway, the virtual ones,
Yes, I'm at home.
yeah, we have a list of all the volunteers this year that you'll be able to go to, and it will have all the phone numbers for all the mentors that you can call if you have questions to talk to.
Okay.
That's one of the ways that you'll be mentored.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question and welcome back.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone else? All right. I'm going to pull up a presentation and also talk through how I'll flip between that and we'll be in the 4012 and I'll talk through a little bit about that. So give me a second here and I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. All right. So I do want to keep this I don't want to put this in presentation mode because again, I'm only on the one monitor today and I want to be able to flip back and forth. But we have 3 sessions, as I said, this week. Today, tomorrow, and Wednesday. Between 7 and 9, so 2 hours for each session. Given how we've run this in the past years, and what we have to cover in this the basic training, I want to shift it a little bit, and I'm going to be a little ambitious for today's session. I really want to do as much of the basic test questions 1 through 6 today. Because then, while it sounds like 7, 8, 9, it's only 3 questions, but those are the ones where we get into TaxSlayer, into the practice lab, and I'd really like to spend more time there. I feel like every year we've done this, I run out of time because I want to be sensitive to your time and make sure that you get, what you need, but also give you time to really practice in the practice lab. So I feel like we can do this, but if we'll get through what we can today and we can always pull this back up at the beginning of tomorrow's session if we need to. So I don't want you, as I've said that, I'm saying that because I don't want you to feel like you can't ask questions or we can't have discussions about stuff. I definitely want to leave time for that. But I feel confident that we can get through the first 6 questions and at least get you comfortable with what they're asking for and the sections in the 4012 that you'll be looking at. And you'll have time, between in tomorrow's session and Wednesday session, and even over, in days after that to read through the resource. All right. So with that, first question that I'll ask all of you is just to make sure that do you have a printed and/or electronic copy of the 4012 available? And that is the resource here. I'll pull it up real quick. That's this resource here, the 4012. So I'll flip back and forth. I like the electronic version of it myself for a couple of reasons. One, there's some I can navigate through it. Like I can click on the table of contents and actually get to that page. And that helps me be able to flip back and forth as I need. It's also good for our training as we're going through that. The other thing I like about the electronic version is that it's hopefully more updated, although this particular electronic version, I still feel like there's some numbers that aren't quite up to date. Luckily for us with the test, those numbers, at least for questions 1 through 6, there's no impact to that. But I like being able to go to the electronic version because it's supposed to have the most updated tables and numbers and things like that. But I'll talk through if there are places where I know that there are things that aren't quite updated. So making sure first that you all have a copy of your 4012. The 6744, again, either printed or electronic, that's where all the test questions are. So as I talk through that, that's where we'll be referring to the test questions themselves. I'm not going to pull up an electronic version of that because I do have the questions themselves on the slides. So I'll talk through it that way, but you absolutely can have a printed or electronic copy and just take note of the resources, the tabs that are have the information for each question, and we will cover all the questions themselves. And then the last question I have for today, we're not going to get into the practice lab, but I want to make sure that if you haven't had a chance to get into it, that you are able to do so before tomorrow. And if you have any questions about that, to let me know. So actually, I'm going to pause for a quick second here. Is there anyone that hasn't been able to get into the practice lab yet?
Yes.
Okay. Are you having trouble or you just haven't tried yet? Either is fine. We can save that for the end of our session today. We'll make sure that I can at least get the link for you, put it in the chat, and we can talk through what you might need to do to get into it for tomorrow's session. All right. All right. Any other questions about these resources that you see on the screen here?
Is there where's the electronic version of the 4012?
So the easiest way to get that, I just do a Google search of,
Okay.
Yep. IRS 4012, and it comes up. And I definitely would always guide you to the IRS website. All of the resources are there on their website. So if you're looking at, a results list, make sure it's that website and not some other third party that's trying to, offer you something else besides the document itself.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions? All right. Well, on that, according to my timeline here, we are doing quite well on the time. So let's take advantage of it. So let's jump right in. Like I said, my goal for today is to try to get through the first 6 questions of the basic certification test, and show you how to use the 4012 to help answer those. So let's start with a question, and then I'll spend a little bit of time in the 4012 for this particular question, kind of talking through what the resources are, and how you might answer this question. So if you want to turn to, and actually I'll pull it up. I know I said I'm not going to pull it up electronically, but I'm going to have. So we are in the 6744, page 31 starts the basic test questions. And so I'm on basic test question 1. And the way these questions are structured is they'll give you, at least the first 6, I'll follow the same format. They'll give you some interview notes about who the person is, who the taxpayer is, any other information about them. And then it will ask questions related to that person, that taxpayer scenario. And so for basic test question or scenario 1, Fred and Pat, there are 2 test questions. So you'll see on page 31, basic scenario 1 is about Fred, and there are 2 test questions for Fred. And so, like I said, what we'll do in our trainings for these, at least for the first 6 questions, we'll review some of this. I will flip to a slide that lists out all of the tabs in the 4012 that are related to that, so you can take note of those. And then we'll actually flip into the 4012 so that you can take a look. I'll walk you through it for the first couple. But we'll follow that same format, and then we'll talk through and review the actual questions themselves and the answers to those questions. So first question then, or first scenario, again, Fred. Fred is 39 years old, has never been married. Pat, age 14, is Fred's brother who has lived with him all year, and Fred has provided all of Pat's support and provided over half the cost of keeping up the home. Fred has earned $48,000 in wages. Fred is blind and cannot be claimed as a dependent by another taxpayer. And Fred and Pat are both U.S. citizens, have valid Social Security numbers, and lived in the U.S. the entire year. So quick, side, each of the scenarios follow a similar format. They're designed this way because, again, for those of you who or this is your first time going through this is all information that you'll gather during an intake. The taxpayer will come, they'll fill out some forms, and if you're doing any intakes, you'll gather additional information from them. And if you are just not doing intakes and just doing the preparation, then this is information that you will see having been gathered on the forms that they fill out and all the information that they provide. These are based off of questions that a person doing the intake will ask them, information on the forms again that they fill out. And the test questions themselves really try to give you as much of the information that is going to be relevant to answering the questions related to it. Sometimes there's more information. Sometimes it's just there because it seems like that's a normal scenario. Also, I'll say that they do try to have scenarios that are fairly realistic, but given the population of taxpayers that come to use our services, not every situation of these scenarios is going to be reflective of that. But at least it, I think, gives a good representation of how to use the 4012 and what kinds of questions and information is going to be really important. So with that, you'll get information about the scenario, about who the taxpayer is, and then the questions themselves try to ask you a little bit about that person. Okay, so the first two test questions for this scenario are: what is the most advantageous filing status allowable that Fred can claim on his tax return? And apologies, I realized that I copied and pasted this from last year's scenarios, which you'll notice a lot of them are similar. So I did not update the date on that. Oh, goodness. Why is this? Here we go. Okay. So what is the most advantageous filing status? That is a very common question that you will need to either review with the taxpayer during intake, or when you're doing the preparation, understand what has been selected and what is the most, what works for them. And then the second question related to this is: Fred can claim a higher standard deduction because he's blind. Is that true or false? So we'll talk about how you'd find that information out in the 4012. The other thing I'll call out is the test questions themselves do ask you to have a certain level of understanding of what these concepts are and how to use the resource in the 4012, how to use the pages to find that answer manually. But the nice thing about both our intake process and the answers, as well as the TaxSlayer software, a lot of these answers are captured and calculated for us using the TaxSlayer software. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a good understanding of what the answer should be, especially to look at something and go, oh, that doesn't quite seem right. But we don't have to have all this memorized again. The 4012 is a great resource, and TaxSlayer as a software will do a lot of these kinds of calculations and make the right selections for us as well. I'm going to pop this up on the screen if you guys want to take a quick note of so any questions at this point, and then I'm going to flip to the 4012 and take a little bit of time to go through the test questions are structured and what the kinds of questions, especially for those of you who this is the first time you're seeing this resource, understanding what they are, whether you have a printed copy or electronic copy. I'll walk you through what the resource actually has for you. So we're first going to, in order to answer those questions, we need to look at the filing status decision tree, which we'll find on B13. We can look at the filing status interview tips, which are on B14. We can look at the information about how to determine who is a qualifying person, qualifying you to file as head of household, which is on B15. And then we can look at what the standard deduction tables are on F3 and F5. So if you want to take a quick note of all of those tabs, and then we will flip to the 4012. All right, if anybody needs me to pop back to that, I can. But let's first look at what the 4012 is. So I do want this to be as, I want it to at least be as, 100% for you, but this covers information about our volunteer standards of conduct, and general information about what this resource is, how to use the guide. But again, the electronic version of it, what I like about it is I can navigate. These are hyperlinks. I can navigate to these sections. But this guide really covers all sorts of information about who must file, about how to start a return. You'll see screenshots of TaxSlayer. You'll see the steps that walk you through how to actually go into TaxSlayer and complete the information. Gives a lot of great call outs and tips and tricks for how to use the software. But it's really organized in a way that starts with, at the beginning, who's the taxpayer, what's their status, and then it talks about who their dependents might be, what their income information is, any adjustments to that income, then deductions, credits, things like that. So as I talk about, in order to answer the question, you would want to look at this tab. That's where that information is going to be. These are the sections that we're talking about, and then the pages related to those sections. Any questions about how this is organized so far? Again, I know it's a lot. Nobody expects you to memorize it, but this is how we'll use this resource to try to answer those questions. All right, let me flip back real quick to the deck here. So in order to answer the question of what is the most advantageous filing status allowable, we would want to look at the section in the 4012 that talks about that. And for that, there's a filing status decision tree. Okay, so again, if I click back to the 4012 document and I look at these pages here, I can look at, B13. So determination of filing status decision tree. So actually, I'm just going to click on that, and it's going to take me to that page. All right, so what does this resource look like? You'll see a lot of decision trees in the 4012. So we're going to take a minute to kind of walk through what this looks like. Again, TaxSlayer does a lot of this for us, but it is good, especially at the beginning, to understand how either TaxSlayer or how you manually would arrive at this. Okay. So when you talk about a decision tree, it's going to say start here, and you're going to answer the questions, and it's going to, the answer to those questions are going to be no or yes. And depending on that answer, you're going to follow that arrow or that line and go to the next box, the next question. All right. So for this one, determination of filing status. How do you know? How does someone know what their filing status should be? So you're going to start here. And the first question is, were you married on the last day of the year? So on the last day of the tax year, and that's usually the decision too for a lot of these status values or things like that. The last day of the tax year is the date that we're talking about. So on the last day of the tax year, was this taxpayer married? So if we flip back to our notes here, we see that Fred has never been married. Okay. So the answer to that is no. All right. So then we go to the next question. Did your spouse die during the year? Okay. Was not married, so it wasn't that. So then the answer to that question is no. And then the next box says, do all of the following apply? And you have to pay attention to that when these decision trees or other things or tables ask that question. You have to look at, is it asking all or any? And we'll see examples throughout the rest of this that kind of talk through that. But in this case, it's do all of these apply? So did your spouse die in these years? You paid more than half the cost of keeping up your home. You paid more than half the cost of keeping up your home for the required period of time. Your son or daughter, but not a foster child, lived with you. There's a lot of information here. We're not going to go through all of this at this point. We will revisit a lot of these concepts and a lot of these questions. But again, for the sake of walking through this as a first example, I'm going to skip through a couple of these. Please, though, if you have questions, let me know. But this box then says, do all of the following apply? The answer to that is no, because he wasn't married, so there wasn't, a spouse that passed away. That automatically, says we can move on to the next question. So then the answer to this question in this box is no. So we move on to this one. Do both of the following apply? And again, there's 2 bullets here, but it still means all. You paid more than half the cost of keeping up your home for the required period of time, and a qualifying person, and you have to see who is that qualifying person, that you can go to that table to see what qualifies a person to be a qualifying person. Did that person who met those requirements live with you in your home for more than half of the year? Okay. So the answer to this question, then, this is the end of this decision tree. So we would need to know, did they pay more than half the cost of keeping up the home? So
Yes.
again, I go back to, if I go back to there, Fred provided all this information. He did this. So he provided he supported himself. Okay. The second bullet that says a qualifying person, lived with you, and did they qualify as a qualifying person? Okay. So this is where we get to the end of this, right? So we need to be able to answer that question. If the answer to this box is no, then they are single. That is their filing status. But if both of these apply, then their answer would be head of household. But how do we know what head of household, what qualifies that person? We have to say, all right, we have to know if that person is a qualifying person. Okay. So we might be able to kind of guess at that, but we don't want to guess at any of this. Okay. So again, we're going to look at this and say, all right, what do we know about Pat? Pat is age 14, Fred's brother, who lived with him all year. Fred provided all of Pat's support and provided over half the cost of keeping up the home. Okay. So let's find out if Pat is a qualifying person. That would would allow both of these to be true, and therefore then say that, Fred is head of household versus being single. So the answer to that will be on B15, which is who is a qualifying person qualifying you to file for that. Before we go through that, I'm going to pause and ask if anyone knows, why does this matter? Why does it matter if Fred is files as single or files as head of household? Does anyone know that?
It has to do with how much deduction they get.
Yep, that's perfect. Yeah. So there are certain statuses that are more advantageous. And so if you qualify for them, then your standard deduction or other things, other deductions or things like that are better for you. Okay. So at a minimum, the standard deduction for someone who is single is going to be less than for someone who is listed as head of household. So we want to make sure that Fred can qualify as head of household if he can, because he will get more as a standard deduction and possibly then be eligible even for other things. But yes, that is absolutely right. So how do we see if Pat qualifies Fred to be head of household? So we are going to keep moving forward to this next page. And again, the 4012 kind of goes in that logical order. So hopefully that's also something you find is very helpful. This would be another example of what the 4012 has in terms of resources. So decision tree is one of them. There are charts, there are other things. But there's also a lot of notes. I'll also try to point out when we're talking about not using something alone or using it, in combination with something, the 4012 does try to do a good job with that. So in this case, it's a good example. Don't come right to here. Use this, in combination with the other pages that we were just on. But let's see. Basically, the way this kind of chart works is you start on the left column and you start with the first question, and then you move across the table and follow the answers or follow the flow based on what the table's listing. So if the person is your qualifying child, such as your child or grandchild, and the child is single and all of these things, then that person is a qualifying person, or if it's this person, if it's this status, not a qualifying person. So that's this first example of how you would kind of read through this chart. Okay. We know that Pat is not a child or grandchild. Okay. So what is Pat though? Pat is a qualifying relative, possibly. Not father or mother. So then we would automatically go to the next box here that says a qualifying relative other than your father or mother, such as a grandparent or sibling who meets certain tests. So then you do have to read through all of these here to see if that person meets those requirements. So did that relative live with you for more than half the year? You can claim them as a dependent. If that person is a child, stepchild, foster, descendant of any of them, half sibling, etc., etc. It does list out other options here. If it's your relative who didn't live with you for more than half the year, they're not related to you in one of the ways listed above, or you can't claim that relative as your dependent, and then it gives you that answer. So in this case, though, let me flip back to the notes here. Pat is age 14. And Pat's Fred's brother and lived with him all year. Okay. And Fred provided all of Pat's support and provided over half the cost of keeping up the home. So by that, we know that Pat is Fred's relative, lived with him for more than half the year, and therefore then is a qualifying person. So because that criteria is met, then we can go back up to the decision tree that we were on, and both of these are true. So you paid for more than half the cost of keeping up your home and also had a qualifying person with you for more than half the year. And so because we can answer yes to both of these questions, then Pat can be listed or claimed as head of household. So I'm going to pause there for a second. Any questions on how we used this decision tree and those interview questions to kind of arrive at this answer? All right. So I think hopefully we feel comfortable enough with at least question one. What is the most advantageous filing status allowable, right? And it would be head of household. And then the second question here is, Fred can claim a higher standard deduction because he is blind. So the answer to that, we're going to pop to the standard deduction pages and talk through what shows there. I do go back again because I'm in the electronic version. So we're going to just look at the standard deduction page here. And again, this is one of those places where I believe these numbers are not quite updated. I think it's the tables this year are 15.5. I'm not sure why this is reflecting something different. But again, for our purposes and the basic certification test questions, they don't impact what the answers are going to be. And again, TaxSlayer is updated for you at least the real version of it. I don't know about the practice lab. From everything I've played around with is also updated, but the production environment is updated as well. Okay, so if I'm looking at this, this is again that table that kind of talks about what their filing status is and then what their standard deduction is. Okay, so again, let's flip back to, I'm going to be flipping back a little bit more at the beginning just so that we cover these. Fred can claim a higher standard deduction because he's blind. Is that true or false? Well, first of all, this table at this point just says standard deduction for most people. If the taxpayer's filing status is single or married filing separately, their standard deduction is this. If they're married filing joint or a qualifying surviving spouse, it's a little higher. And if they're head of household, it's this level as well. So again, back to the question of what's the most advantageous, it is head of household, does qualify for that, because if he chose single, his standard deduction would only be this versus this amount. Okay. Now, the other thing I'll point out as you're reading through the 4012 and using it as a resource is there are a lot of asterisks or call outs that say this is the norm except when this, or this is what you should follow most of the time except in these situations. And there are a lot of those throughout the 4012. So especially in the beginning, as you're getting used to it, just pay attention to those. If you see asterisks, if you see number 1s or 2s or other footnote indications, that's where a lot of really important detail can be found. Okay, so this is saying the standard deduction chart for most people, asterisk. Don't use this chart if the taxpayer was born before this date or is blind, or if someone can claim them as a dependent, which is a whole other discussion. But because in our interview notes, we see that Fred is blind. Blind cannot be claimed as a dependent. We're not supposed to use this standard chart. We're supposed to look at something else. Okay. So how do we see that? Or where do we find that information? There's another page that says standard deduction chart for people born before January 2nd or were blind. Okay. So this is the chart that we would be using for those individuals, and Pat being one of them. Sorry, Fred being one of them. The way this works is basically tally up points. So if you were born before January 2nd, you check a box. If your spouse, if you're filing jointly, was born before, check this box. If you yourself are blind, check a box. If your spouse is blind, check a box. Then you enter the total number of boxes checked. Well, Pat was not born before this date, but he is blind. So you would put a 1 here. And then if you are a head of household and you have 1 tally, then your standard deduction is this amount compared to this amount here. So standard deduction for head of household is 22.5 according to this chart. According to this worksheet, because Fred is blind, has one extra checkbox, then his standard deduction would be 24.5. So it is more. So to go back to our question, Fred can claim a higher standard deduction because he is blind. Is that true or false? It is true. All right. So I know that's a lot, especially if this is the first time you're seeing how this works and how to answer the questions and how to use the 4012. So I'll pause there for a minute and ask if there are any questions. Okay. So let's just do a quick little review here. This is scenario 1 about Fred and his brother Pat, who lives with him. And these are the 2 test questions based on this scenario. This is these are the resources that you would be able to use to help answer those questions. Again, looking through the 4012, looking for the filing status decision tree, interview tips to help answer those questions, understand how someone is considered a qualifying person, qualifying you to file as head of household, and then what standard deductions you have based on your filing status and what other additional deduction amount you might be eligible for depending on your situation. And so then that gets you to the answers that we've kind of covered. So question 1, answer is head of household. That is the most advantageous. And yes, Fred can claim a higher standard deduction because he is blind. That is true. All right. Any questions on that? All right. I promise we'll go through the rest of these questions a little bit faster because, again, my goal is still to get through what we can. But hopefully that was a good introduction to how to use the 4012 and how to use those resources. Again, nobody needs to memorize this. That's not what the test questions are about, and certainly not what is expected of anyone in order to, be part of the tax season. You're not alone. There's tons of resources. We also have questions every year. All right, so I'm going to pause there before we get into test question 2. So if everyone wants to flip in there for 6744. We're going to look at basic scenario 2 for Alex and Mary Walsh, and that is on page 32 in your 6744 book. It lists all the information here. I'm going to give you all a moment to read through what you see here, and then we'll talk through the questions. So our second scenario, Alex, age 31, and Mary, age 30. They are married and will file a joint return. They cannot be claimed as dependents by other taxpayers. They have no children or other dependents. They both work. They are not full-time students. Alex earned wages of $12,000. Ellen, oh, my bad. Again, I copied and pasted from last year, so that should actually say Mary. I'll fix that right now. Alex earned wages of $12,000 and Mary earned wages of $4,000. Alex and Mary are both U.S. citizens and have valid Social Security numbers. And Alex and Mary have investment income of $300 in taxable interest. So, 2 questions related to that. Alex and Mary are not eligible to claim the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC. And the second question is, Alex and Mary's $300 of interest counts as earned income for the Earned Income Tax Credit. Again, all these sections are in the 4012. You will get very familiar with each of these as time goes on and as you have different scenarios and different taxpayer situations that you'll cover. So where are we going to look for this information? Again, don't expect you to have the 4012 memorized just yet, so I'll give you the tab numbers and then we'll go through them. There's a section called Earned Income Table. There's a section on the summary of those eligibility requirements. We're going to review each of those, and that is in section I. So I3, I4, I5, and I7. So Earned Income Credit is quick summary, a credit that folks, but depending on their level of income, are potentially eligible for. It takes into account how much, what income they have, and potentially gives them a little bit of a credit benefit at the end of that. Again, this isn't necessarily something that you have to have all of these tables or qualifications memorized, because TaxSlayer as a software, depending on the information that you've put in there in terms of their age and their filing status, the amount of income that they have, any dependents that they have. TaxSlayer will calculate all of that for you. But it is good to start to get comfortable with these as general concepts and at least know where to look the information up if you have to, especially as a taxpayer may have a question for you on, why they maybe did or did not get something, depending on, as they've come to us over the years and things with them change, or the rules change, or the levels or amounts change, the qualifications change. Good to have that information, to at least understand where to go look up those details and try to answer their questions. Again, don't expect anyone, especially the first year, to be able to answer many of these questions on their own. You have your mentors, you have anyone at the site coordinators, anyone to try to help answer any of the taxpayer questions that come along. But the goal here is to direct you to where those resources are, so you start to understand where that information is coming from and where those answers are coming from. Okay, so first, for earned income, the first thing that we have to look at is what qualifies as earned income. It's not everything. So earned income includes all of these things. It does not include these things. So that's another way that the 4012 will provide you information as a resource in a table, and it says, something like this earned income for this type of qualification. These count things like taxable wages, Medicaid, waiver payments, union strike benefits, gross income of a statutory employee. All these things here do count as earned income. Things here: interest and dividends, Social Security, including SSI, SSDI, and railroad retirement benefits, welfare benefits, things like that, pension and annuities. These do not count as earned income for the purposes of this earned income benefit. These tables exist in many different places, and so it is always good to make sure that you're looking in the right spot when you're looking for what counts and what doesn't count within the context of the situation that you're looking for. So let's flip back real quick to the questions. Alex and Mary are not eligible to claim the earned income tax credit. One other thing to point out in terms of the questions themselves, the certification, sometimes they're a little tricky. I don't personally love the not question or the, those kinds of reverse questions, but they do try to bold them at least. And as we go through them, I'll try to point them out as well. But this is a question that's Alex and Mary are not eligible. Is that true or false? So if they are eligible, then potentially the answer to this question is false, but we'll see where that goes. And then the next question is Alex and Mary's $300 of interest counts as earned income for the tax credit. Is that true or false? So the first thing that we can look at here is that, what counts as earned income? Well, we can actually see at this point the answer to that second question. Interest and dividends do not count. So we would potentially at this point know that the $300 of interest, the question is, does it count? And the answer to this is false. It does not count. And the reason is because in this table, it shows that it does not count. All right, but there's more information. This isn't the only page. All right, so what's next? These are the EIC eligibility requirements. So this will be how we get to this question. Alex and Mary, are they eligible or are they not eligible? So Part A, rules for everyone. Part B, rules if you have a qualifying child. Part C, rules if you don't have a qualifying child. And Part D, any limitations on your earned income and AGI limitations. So again, in terms of what sort of information is part of the 4012 and how it's listed, this is another table, and the way that it's laid out is there's a Part A column. These are rules and things that you would look at if they, for everyone. And then there's other criteria or other rules based on whether or not you have a child, not a qualifying child, or if, and what your income limitations are. So let's take a minute. Okay. Part A, rules for everyone. Taxpayers and qualifying children must all have Social Security that is valid for employment by the due date of the return, okay, including any extensions. So they have to have Social Security numbers. You must meet certain requirements if you're separated and not filing a joint return. And again, this is where that little asterisk or number 4 comes in. So you'll see all of this. This is a lot. There's a lot of footnotes that you would need to double check to make sure, depending on that taxpayer situation, what qualifies or disqualifies them. We'll come back to that because it'll come. Other questions will review that. You must be a U.S. citizen or a resident alien. Can't file if it's related to foreign earned income. I wanted to point this out. Even though we thought we answered that their investment income doesn't count, it must be below this threshold. Now, in this case, it was only 300, but this is something that potentially could disqualify them, even though interest income doesn't count for earned income. If it's a lot, it could disqualify them. And then in this case, they can't be a qualifying child of another person. All right, so these are the things that everyone has to meet. So far, our taxpayers do meet this. The next column is, do they have a qualifying child? They do not in this case, so we can kind of skip over this and go right to the rules if they don't have a qualifying child. So the first one here is they must be at least age 25, but under age 65 as of December 31st or the end of the tax year. They are. We can go back to our little interview notes here, okay? They can't be a dependent of another person, which, again, this would be information that you would gather during the intake process, but right now it's listed here. They cannot be claimed as dependents by any other taxpayer. They must have lived in the U.S. for more than half the year, and they can't be the qualifying child of another person. So they meet both of those requirements as well. And then the last part for the earned income credit is based on what that earned income amount is, what their AGI limitations are. Now, in the test question, we're going to make some assumptions because we're going to assume that this is the only thing that they have reported. We're going to assume that their adjusted gross income is just the addition of these two amounts here. We know that the 300 in taxable interest doesn't count. So we're going to assume some numbers, but for the sake of assumption, 12,000 and 4,000 is 16,000 total. It has to be below a certain threshold. So if they are married filing jointly with no qualifying children, it needs to be below this amount. So again, making an assumption that their adjusted gross income is less than that, it's the 16,000, we could safely say that yes, they do qualify, okay? Again, the way that the test question is worded, though, is that Alex and Mary are not eligible to claim the earned income tax credit. Is that true or false?
False.
It is false, correct. So that is the answer to that question. And then the second one, Alex and Mary's 300 of interest counts as earned income. Is that true or false?
False.
That is also false. So again, another example of how you would use the 4012 and the information provided to you to go through and get to the answers for the test questions themselves. So as we talked about, they are eligible, so the answer to this question is false, and it does not count. So again, the answer to that is false as well. All right, I'll pause there for a second. Questions? All right, so continuing on. Now, this is the part where I want to give you all some practice. I've kind of guided you through the first two questions or the first two scenarios, kind of talk through how to use the 4012. So I'm going to read through this scenario. I'm going to give you some information about what pages in the 4012 you could look at. So scenario number 3, and again, we are on page 33 in the 6744. So this is Luis and Anna Ramirez. They are married and always file married filing jointly. Luis earned $26,000 in wages and Anna earned $8,500 in wages. The Ramirezes paid all the cost of keeping up a home and provided all the support for their two children, Elena and Jorge, who lived with them all year. Elena is 12 and Jorge is 16. And all four of them are U.S. citizens with valid Social Security numbers and lived in the U.S. the entire year. So the questions to answer for this scenario: which child qualifies the Ramirezes for the child tax credit, CTC? And this is another way that some of the certification questions are often worded. Is it neither of the children? Is it one or the other? Or is it both of them? And then the second question for this scenario is the Ramirezes can claim a maximum refundable additional child tax credit of a certain amount. And this is on the certification test. You are asked to put in, type in a whole number. There's a box in the test. Instead of multiple choice, you select an answer. There's a text box and you type in the answer. And it's whole numbers only, no special characters. But we'll talk through what that amount might look like. So these are your two questions. And these are the pages that you'll go to in the 4012. You'll look at the section G4 for the child tax credit. There's also G5, so the page right after, which talks about additional child tax credit information. After that, page G6, there's a table that helps walk you through, does your qualifying child qualify you for the child tax credit or credit for other dependents? And then there is some bonus information on page G7, the credit for other dependents. So I'll pop back to that, but just so that you all see what that looks like. So again, tab G, non-refundable credits. There's the child tax credit page. Oh, uh-oh. All right. There we go. Okay. So starting here, use these pages to read through how to answer those questions. So, all right. So for those of you watching, go ahead and just pause this. Try to answer those questions on your own. Review the tabs that you just saw. And then when we get back, we'll review those. We'll review the answers. Here's our scenario 3. Luis and Anna and their two children, Elena and Jorge. And the questions are, which of their children qualifies the Ramirezes for the child tax credit? And how much maximum refundable additional child tax credit are they eligible for? So again, as we looked at, we're going to go to the section G4, 5, 6, and 7 to look at that information. I'm going to pop over here. All right, so G4 talks about, I just wanted to point this out, that this talks about or gives you some samples of what the screenshots in TaxSlayer might look like too. Just wanted to point that out. There's also something really cool as you see the screenshots. We'll get into what TaxSlayer does and how that works, but it calls out if something is out of scope for us. But then it kind of or step stamps the places that you would go for that. So this kind of talks about where in TaxSlayer you would go for that. We'll practice that in our future sessions. But let's take a look at the child tax credit. Couple of things to note here, making sure that the taxpayer's credit hasn't been disallowed previously. Those are questions that you'll see in the intake forms. And a little bit of information. We won't spend too much time today talking about it, but this is a credit intended to reduce tax. So that's where if you've seen, we've seen the term, we haven't spent too much time on it, but refundable versus non-refundable. Refundable means that you can actually get money back. So not only will it reduce your taxable, reduce your tax that you're supposed to owe, but it can actually say, oh, and beyond that, we'll give you money back. A non-refundable means it will reduce your tax amount down to zero, but won't go beyond that. So it won't give you any money back. And so some of these are fully refundable, partially refundable, not refundable at all. We can get into some of those details a little bit, later in our scenarios, and certainly, stuff that you'll review and get exposure to and experience with as you go through it. But just to call that out too, what those terms mean. So this credit is intended to reduce the tax. This part of the credit is not refundable. The credit is up to $2,000 per qualifying child and calculates automatically. Again, so we talked about how TaxSlayer will do this automatically for you. If the taxpayer or the spouse of filing jointly does not have a Social Security number or ITIN issued on or before the date of the return, you can't claim it. So just not that you have to, again, memorize all of these specific details for each of these, but know that that's what that means, and how you would read through that to understand whether someone is eligible or not eligible. Again, TaxSlayer does a lot of this for us, but just to understand where that's coming from. So let's real quick flip back to the questions. Which of the children qualifies them for the child tax credit? So we're going to go through what this means. Who's a qualifying child? Anyone under age 17 at the end of the tax year. Are they under age 17? Yes. Elena is 12 and Jorge is 16. They are a U.S. citizen or U.S. national or resident alien. Yes. They can be claimed as your dependent. Yes. And there's some additional qualifications for that. They did not provide over half of their own support. And that is a different way to word it, but an important way that it's worded. Some things require that that the dependent or the taxpayer did or did not provide their own support. It doesn't specify who has to provide their support in this case. So that's something to look out for as well. But in this case, making sure that did Elena and Jorge, the children, they did not provide over half of their own support. And that is true. Did they live with the taxpayer for more than half of the year? Yes. And do they have a valid Social Security numbers? Yes. So they met all of these requirements, both of them. So in this case, the answer to this question would be both of them. Did anybody come up with something different as they were going through it, or have any questions on this? All right. The second question then is, they can claim a maximum refundable additional child tax credit of what amount? So we would be looking for an amount. And if we look in the next pages here, there is an additional child tax credit. What's the eligibility? Taxpayers with more than $2,500 of taxable earned income. If they have 3 or more children, they may be eligible for something else as well. And it is limited to $1,700 per qualifying child. So given this information on this page, how much are they eligible for?
$3,400.
Correct. Yep, they are both eligible, both children qualify, and it is $1,700 per child, per qualifying child, so just double that, and it is $3,400. So, questions on this scenario?
So that, excuse me, so it's a maximum, it's 3,400, but the software is going to calculate whether or not that they qualify for any of that and how much that would be.
Correct. Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
These questions again, great question. These scenarios are designed to give you exposure to what these situations might be, to understand how to find the answer manually in the 4012 and, go through what those tables are, those qualifying interview questions or decision trees would be. But this would not be something that you would need to do on a regular basis. The software, you would put in their information based on their intake, and then the software calculates it. Now, as you're looking at their return, it's always really helpful to understand where the software is calculating those numbers from, and we'll get into exactly how it shows up on their return, and what lines you'll see and what it means. And so if knowing what you know about this situation, if you're looking at their return and you're like, why is it not 3,400? That might be something for you to ask a question about as you're reviewing something. Or if somebody, again, if the taxpayer calls you and says, hey, I only got 1,700, not 3,400. Why? One, to make sure that we input the information correctly, that the software, calculated what it needed to. We didn't forget a box or something. But then to go back to those rules and say, oh, okay, that explains. That's a good example. If Jorge was, for this example, Jorge's 16, but in some of them, if he was 17 by the end of the year, that might disqualify him for certain things. I don't think it disqualifies him for this particular credit, but some of them, if you are 17 by the end of the year, then yeah. So that also could depend on like what their birthday is, but again, the software is supposed to track that. So we'd want to make sure, did we put the birthday in correctly? Things like that. But yeah, the software will calculate all that for us, but good practice in this example to at least get exposure to where that comes from. Any other questions on this scenario? All right. Scenario 4 then. We're looking at Gavin and Molly. They are married and will file a joint return. Molly is a U.S. citizen with a valid social. Gavin is a resident alien with an individual taxpayer identification number, or an ITIN. Again, not to spend too much time going down what that, the difference between those two, but ITINs are for those who are not eligible for a social but need a number in order to pay taxes. It is different than residency and things like that, but it allows them to pay the taxes that they need. So the questions to answer for this scenario are Blake, the child who's 11, qualifies them for the credit for other dependents. Is that true or false? And the second question for this scenario is, do they qualify for the earned income tax credit even though Gavin has an ITIN? So those are the two questions. We're going to go back to our credit for other dependents section on G7, and then we're going to revisit our summary of EIC eligibility requirements on I4, on tab I4. All right, so again, the questions are, Blake qualifies them for the credit for other dependents, and Blake, again, is age 11. So we're going to scroll to the section on credit for other dependents table. Again, we've talked a little bit about how there's multiple pages and reviewing each of these pages and kind of working with them together. In this example, we're going to go right to this page here. This says to remember to apply the steps for each dependent. So, in the case that you would be doing this for both of those children, the question is only asking about the one child. So we're just going to stick with the first child. And then, go through the table, answer the questions, and follow the action depending on what the answer is. So in this case, again, we're going to look at Blake. We know that Blake is not, is this person your qualifying child dependent? Yes, go to step 2. Do they have a social? Yes, they do. Go to step 3. Was the child a U.S. citizen? Yes, we can go to step 4. was the child under age 17 at the end of 2025? So again, this is some of those situations where, you know, that age 17 does matter. So in this case, if this was asking about Kyle, who's 19, the answer would be no. We couldn't claim the credit for that child. But because the question is asking about Blake, yes, Blake is under age 17. So yes, we can go to step 5. Do they have a social security number? Yes, you can claim the child tax credit for this person. So that said, though, this is the credit for other dependents question. So Blake makes them eligible for the child tax credit, but is that person eligible, or does Blake make them eligible for the credit for other dependents? So that's where we need to keep reading further. So if there is a dependent who does not qualify the taxpayer for the child tax credit, then you would, you know, read through these and see what sort of, you know, qualifications there are for that. So again, it's a little tricky in my opinion, but this credit for other dependents, Blake does not qualify them for that because Blake qualifies them for the child tax credit, not the credit for other dependents. Kyle would qualify them for that, but not Blake. So the answer to this question should be false. Again, the way that the questions sometimes are worded is a little tricky, but sometimes reflective maybe of real life when we've got to figure out exactly what the taxpayer situation is. All right, and then the second question is, the Dowds qualify for the earned income tax credit even though Gavin has an ITIN. So we were on that page before. So let's go back to, again, EIC eligibility requirements. That's on tab I-4. So we have been on this table before. Part A, rules for everyone. Part B, if they have a qualifying child. C, if they don't. And Part D, the AGI, the income information. But this, I'll give you a quick shortcut. This is the part where, you know, taxpayers and qualifying children must all have Social Security that is valid for employment by the due date. And remember I said there's lots of those little asterisks or footnote. And so this one right here, Social Security number, the question we already know, there's an ITIN, Gavin has an ITIN. So if we're looking at this one and I see number 1 footnote here, I'm going to scroll down here and there's a whole bunch of information. So if the taxpayer's Social Security card says valid, taxpayer can use it, but we know this person has an ITIN. So if the taxpayer or spouse is filing joint return, and they are, if they have an ITIN, they can't get the EIC. So again, it's really important to read a lot of these footnotes because in this case, that's where the answer to that question is. So if I were to go here, the Dowds qualify, the answer to that is false. Gavin has an ITIN, they're filing jointly, that disqualifies them to get this earned income tax credit. Again, TaxSlayer will calculate all of that. We'd have to enter this information into the system anyway. It would calculate that and it would not grant them the EIC credit, but that would answer the question if a taxpayer had that as a question or somebody else did. Questions on this scenario? All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
In this case, but the mother has a Social Security, can she claim the child tax even though they child jointly?
Nope. So that's a great question. This is an example of the filing status also plays a part in this. So if for some reason Molly, first of all, it's not very, even with these things, it's not very advantageous for Molly to not file jointly. And to married filing separately is probably one of the most disadvantageous statuses to use. But because of that, this would also not, let's see, what do I say? Let's see. Married taxpayers who don't file a joint return can claim the EIC only if they have a qualifying child living with them for more than half the year and either lived apart from their spouse for the last 6 months. So again, this is where these footnotes really come into play. Based on the information we know about these taxpayers, they live together the whole year, and it would not benefit either of them to file separately. But even if they did, because they did not live apart, that would make Molly ineligible for this, even though she's got a qualifying child. So hopefully that answers your question. It is difficult sometimes to read through these and understand that, and especially if the taxpayer is asking questions about it, because it is, you know, unfortunate that they would not be eligible for this, but that's the way this benefit is written. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. All right. Any other questions about this scenario? All right. We are moving along. I feel really good about getting through the last couple of scenarios here. So we'll move on to scenario 5 here. This talks about Neil as our taxpayer who is single and 63 years old. Neil worked as a cook at the local elementary school and earned wages of $92,500. Neil cannot be claimed as a dependent by another taxpayer, and Neil is a U.S. citizen with a valid Social Security number who lived in the U.S. the entire year. So 2 questions here. Neil qualifies to claim the earned income tax credit. Is that true or false? And then which of the following statements below are true? So Neil's, and this is a multiple choice single select. So we already know, based on the way the question's worded, that only one of these things are true. So we just need to find which one of them is true. And is it related to Neil's gross income was more than the gross income limit required to file a federal income tax return? Does Neil's income require him to file that tax return? Neil should file a federal tax return to receive the refundable earned income tax credit, or Neil must file a tax return because he is single and 63 years old. So which of these are true? Which of these are a requirement based on Neil's situation here? So to answer those questions, we would look again back at the EIC eligibility, and then we're going to look at a chart we haven't really looked at, not only what their filing status, or who should file, but we're going to look at who should file, and see more information about, even if they're not required to file, why maybe they should. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the back at the EIC. So does Neil qualify to claim the earned income tax credit? We know Neil is single, earned this amount, does not have any qualifying children. So let's look at summary of EIC without a qualifying child. So we're going to go back to that. So I'll point to a couple of different things here. We've so far looked at the summary of the eligibility requirements. We've looked at this table before, and it kind of breaks down based on rules for everyone, qualifying child, etc. Looked at some of the footnotes here. There are other ways that the information is displayed in these tables. It kind of goes through the same information, but it asks it in a different way. So sometimes this might be a little easier to go through and look at it in this fashion. And it breaks it down separately with a qualifying child, without a qualifying child. So we know that Neil does not have a qualifying child, so we could skip right to this section if we wanted to. So we can look here and say, can you or your spouse be claimed as a dependent? We know the answer to that is no, so we could go to step 2. Were you or your spouse were you or your spouse are filing jointly at least 25 but under the age of 65? Again, if we go back to our information here, yes, he's 63. So yes, they were. We can go to step 3. And did they live in the US for more than half the year? Yes. So we can potentially, this says go to the EIC using the appropriate EIC worksheet. But there's more information. So I wanted to kind of go through how these tables kind of get you to that answer. Sorry, I wanted to make sure that I got to the right section for you. But starting back over real quick, just to regroup, there are sometimes a variety of different tables that you can go through. This is a summary of those requirements. We've gone through this before. In this case, we would get to the same answer that we do if we go through any of these other tables here. Again, there's lots of other details and information. We know that Neil does not have a qualifying child, so we could go right to this section here. EIC without a qualifying child, answer all these questions, then yes, we know that you could compute the EIC using the appropriate worksheet. I thought there was another section that actually showed you what that was, but I don't see it right now and didn't take a note of it. But either way, the answer to this question is yes, based on whether we go through any of these tables or whether we go through this summary that we've gone through before. Making sure that they're under the AGI here. They don't have a qualifying child, so they're not a dependent of someone else. They've lived in the US. They're under age 65 as of December 31st. So the answer is yes. Neil would qualify to earn that earned income tax credit. Again, the software will calculate all of that for you based on the information, but that is how you'd be able to verify that, yes, the answer to that is true. All right, then let's see the next question, which of these statements is true? So this is where we'd want to look at, we haven't yet looked at what makes a person, why does someone have to file for taxes? And even if they aren't required to, what makes it advantageous for them to do so? So in order to look at that, we're going to look at for most people who must file and who should file. So that's on A3, chart D, and A6. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so again, this section here, the very beginning here. So this, we've kind of looked at some other versions of these tables already. If your filing status is single and you're under age 65, then you must file a return if your gross income was at least this much. Okay, so again, if you're under age 65, if your income is at least 15,000, you must file a return. Okay, so if I look at that table and I look back at this person's information, Neil worked as a cook at the local elementary school and earned a wage of $92,500. If that's the only income they're claiming, is that person required to file taxes? This first statement here, Neil's gross income was more than the gross income limit required. The answer to that is no, so we know that's not true. And Neil's income of $92,500 requires him to file a federal income tax return. The answer to that is also no. We know that is not true as well. But just because someone isn't required to file doesn't mean they shouldn't file. So we've got these two other questions here. Neil should file to receive the EIC, or Neil must file because he is single and 63 years old. We can look at that, and there's other information here about age limits. You do not have to file for that. We know that that's not true. So we do then, from the process of elimination, know that it is going to be C, but let's take a look at where we actually see this information. So just because Neil's not required to file, it's advantageous for him to file so that he can receive this earned income tax credit refund. And that is found on who should file, which is A6. So we were on A3. So if we scroll down a little bit more, these are other situations where you must file. But then there's a chart here that talks about who should file. So just because you're not required to doesn't mean it's not advantageous to. So even if you're not required based on, the requirements that we've looked at so far, these are situations where we would recommend, or it is recommended, it is recommended that someone would file. If you had income tax withheld from your pay, your pension, or other Social Security or other income, it's possible that you get a refund. If you made estimated tax payments, you would want to file to, again, see if there's any adjustments to that. You qualify for the earned income credit. So number 3 here, if you qualify for that, the only way you're going to get it is if you file your taxes. And again, remember that earned income credit gives you potentially reduces your taxable income, reduces the amount that you owe, and you would be able to, to get some refunds. So it is advantageous for Neil, even though he's not required. It is advantageous for him to file. So if we go back to this question, which of the following statements is true? It is C, Neil should file to receive that refundable earned income tax credit. It's still his choice, but it is something that it is recommended that he does. Any questions on this scenario? Okay. We are in the home stretch. I promise I will end on time, but hopefully we will be able to get through this last scenario here. Scenario 6. This is about Scott. He is single, 24 years old, has never been married, earned wages of $27,500 during the first half of the year, and then lost his job in September and received a total of $8,000 in unemployment compensation. Scott is a brick mason and took a class at a local masonry to maintain his license. He paid the cost of tuition and a course-related book, and his qualified education expenses were $3,000. Scott also paid student loan interest for courses he previously took to earn his bachelor's degree. For 2025, he paid student loan interest of $900. He does not have any dependents, and he is a U.S. citizen with a valid Social Security number. So in this last scenario, or in this last scenario for tonight, there are 2 new pieces of information or sections of information that we haven't talked about yet. One is unemployment compensation. Is that considered, taxable, and should it be included? Is that true or false? And then there's information about, different education credits. So lifetime learning, American Opportunity Credit. Again, the question of the earned income credit comes up. And then because he's paid some student loan interest for previous classes, how much of that interest can he claim? So these are a couple of new sections that we haven't seen. So I'm going to give you a minute to jot down what sections in the 4012 we would look at. There's an income quick reference guide. There's the earned income table. There's the education credits on J8 and J10. And then student loan interest deduction at a glance, which is on E22. So let's take a look at the questions. Scott's unemployment compensation is taxable and must be included on his return. Is that true or false? So again, if we look at the income quick reference guide on D3, we've looked at tables like this before. What counts? In this case, this is what counts as taxable income. We've looked at other tables for what counts as earned income. Notice that they're slightly different lists, different tables here. It's important to make sure you're looking at the right table. But examples of taxable income. So the question is unemployment on this table? So examples of income to consider when determining whether a return must be filed or if a person meets that gross income test and if it's taxable. So it is alphabetical, thankfully, and we can see here that yes, unemployment compensation is on this table. So this is considered taxable income. So the answer to this question, is it taxable? It must be included. The answer is true. All right, next question. Sorry, I realized I popped to the answer key, but that's okay. We're at the end. Scott is eligible for the following credit: earned income, lifetime learning, American opportunity, or none of the above. Because this is a multiple choice and only one is correct, I'll give you a quick hint. This is about the education expenses, because that was what was in here. It doesn't necessarily mean that's always the scenario. Again, TaxSlayer will calculate a lot of these for you, but for the process, or for the purposes of getting through this in our time tonight, let's talk about if it's what the lifetime learning and American opportunity credit really are. That is found on J8 and J10. So we're going to go there. Okay, so there are two different kinds of education credits that you'll come across with many of our taxpayers that come to us. Again, the TaxSlayer software does calculate this for us, or tell us, hey, which one they're eligible for, or which one they should take advantage of. Won't spend a whole lot of time going through this tonight. There's more examples of this in TaxSlayer examples that we'll go through the next 2 nights. But there's the American Opportunity Credit. This one's really the better one. If you're eligible for it, it is a maximum credit up to $2,500 per eligible student. It is up to 40% is refundable. It is something that a person is eligible for the first 4 years of post-secondary education. So usually the first 4 years of a bachelor's degree. Key information, they may not have a felony drug conviction, and that's a question that's always asked. This one again gives them more, gives you more. But one of the other requirements is that they must be pursuing a degree program they must be pursuing a program leading to a degree or other recognized education credential. So it's usually one of the, besides the time frame, besides how many years they've been eligible for it, this would be one of the ones that disqualifies them from this one, because it isn't just if you sign up to take a class here and there. It has to be part of a degree program that they're going for, and also they must be enrolled at least half-time. Now, if they're not eligible for the American Opportunity Credit, then they are most likely eligible for lifetime learning credit. That can, you can claim that as many times as you need. It is available for all years of post-secondary. It is available for an unlimited number of tax years. They do not have to be pursuing a degree program. And it is available for additional 1 or more courses. This also does have the requirement that there can be no felony drug convictions. And then there's information here about what qualifies as what are considered qualified expenses. We'll get into that in other examples in the next 2 sessions. But just based on this, which one of these do you think Scott would be eligible for, given the information that you've seen so far? I'll actually pop back to the information here. He took a class at a local masonry school to maintain his license. He paid the course. He paid the cost of the tuition. So given that, and given what we've just looked at very quickly, do you think he'd be eligible for the American Opportunity Credit?
No.
Correct.
Probably lifetime.
Sorry, say that again.
Oh, just the lifetime one.
Yep,
Not
exactly.
the other one.
Yep, he's not eligible for the American Opportunity because it is not a half-time, 4-year post-secondary. These would be potentially qualifying questions we might ask to get more information about this, but given what we're seeing here, most likely, taking a class at a local masonry school to maintain his license is not going to be, it's going to be beyond those 4 years. So in this case, the answer is that is eligible for the lifetime learning credit. He would be eligible to claim that credit. And the last question then is about the student loan interest. So it says here that he paid student loan interest for courses he took previously to earn his bachelor's degree. So this also gives a bit of a clue that he's already gotten a degree. He's probably already qualified for those 4 years of the American Opportunity Credit, so can't keep going with that. But now he's still paying student loan interest. So even though he's done with that degree, he's past that, can he claim that student loan interest? Let's find out. So if I look at student loan interest reduction at a glance on E22, so this is an overview of the rules. There would be more information. Again, TaxSlayer will calculate a lot of that for us. But here's the quick summary. Taxpayers can reduce their income subject to tax by up to $2,500. Taxpayer must be legally liable for the loan. So this is a loan that it's under their name. They're the ones paying for it. They must be the taxpayer or other qualifications. The time limit on the deduction, taxpayer can deduct the interest paid during the remaining period of the student loan. So that is a key piece of information here, especially for this particular individual. He's done with the degree, he's taking other classes, but he's still paying on the student loan. So the taxpayer can deduct the interest paid during the remaining period of that student loan. So as long as it takes them to pay off that loan, they would be eligible to claim that interest. So then the question is, given the benefit information here, they can reduce their income by up to $2,500. The amount of the student loan interest that Scott can claim is what? If he paid $900, can he claim what of that can he claim? Yeah, all 900 of it. All right, so yes, unemployment is taxable. He's eligible for the lifetime learning credit because it's post 4 years of the American Opportunity Credit. And as long as he is paying off that loan, any interest of that loan that is his, up to $2,500, he's able to claim. So the answer for that would be, again, another text. You type in the text box, just the numbers, no dollar signs or decimal points or anything. And that is the answer. Okay, so we have covered the first 6 with 3 minutes to spare. What questions can I answer for you still?
Okay. And just to clarify, it sounded like the drug conviction was relevant for the American Opportunity Act, but not for the lifetime
No,
learning.
it is
Is
for
that
both.
correct?
It's for both. Mm-hmm. Yep, it is for
I didn't
both.
read that. What? Can we look at that again? That
I'm gonna pull it
when you
up.
had it up
Let me
there, I
just
thought I saw it does not make them ineligible, but I probably read that once.
Let me just double. No, it's a good question.
I forget where it was up on the screen, where you were comparing the American. Oh, I guess they would be in the education tab.
Yeah, I just wanted to get to.
For lifetime learning, it says felony drug convictions do not make the student ineligible.
That was what I was referring to.
You're right. I apologize. Thank you for calling that out. You're
No
right.
problem. I just didn't want to confuse anybody on that because it does
No.
come up, both those.
Yep. Yeah, for the American Opportunity Credit, it does say that, and for the lifetime learning, it does not make them ineligible for that.
Okay.
Thank you for calling that out.
No problem.
Again, always why it's really good not to just have that in the back of your head and think that you have it all memorized. It's good to read with
Well, it was
detail.
weird. The wording was like a double negative or whatever, so it was
Yeah.
a weird wording too.
Yeah.
But okay, thanks.
Yeah. Awesome. What other questions? All right. Well, we made it to the end. I'm super excited that my ambitious 6-question review, we made it through. I know it's a lot. I know, again, for those of you that this is the first time, please don't feel too overwhelmed. You're not going to be alone. This is designed to get you to the first step of the certification test, and then everything else after that, you will have tons of other support and experience and training, and yeah, lots of opportunity to get real life good experience. So starting tomorrow, we will be in TaxSlayer in the practice lab. So again, if you haven't had a chance, please try to get into that, at least log in, go through the training videos that Donna has set up to make sure that you can get into it. We'll make sure that everybody can get into it. If for some reason you do have trouble tomorrow, we can, try to troubleshoot a little bit, but I'd like to really start and spend as much time as we can going through the last 3 questions, and really being in TaxSlayer, playing around with it. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a
Yes,
great
thank
rest of
you.
your night, and I'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you.